Your dog can track him anywhere." The words hung in Pierce Valley's marble foyer like a challenge to physics itself, spoken by a 7-year-old girl in a pink dress who shouldn't have made it past 3 layers of estate security. Willa stood with one hand resting on her Labrador's golden head, the other clutching a purple backpack, her expression carrying certainty that didn't belong on a child's face during a crisis that had paralyzed every adult in the compound. Pierce's world had fractured exactly 4 hours ago, when Leo vanished from the estate's eastern gardens during what should have been a supervised afternoon. The boys' security detail had reported their charge missing at 3:47 p.m., triggering a lockdown protocol that transformed the luxury compound into a military operation zone. Helicopters circled overhead, thermal imaging sweeping the surrounding forest, while security personnel established search grids using methods that had located fugitives across 3 continents. The head of security stood behind Pierce's shoulder, his tactical vest laden with equipment that suddenly felt decorative rather than functional. Marcus, the estate's property manager, had spent the last hour coordinating with private search teams that cost more per hour than most families earned in months. Their expensive competence had yielded nothing except increasingly grim statistical probabilities about children missing beyond the 4-hour threshold. Willa had somehow navigated through the chaos to reach Pierce directly, bypassing security stations and frantic personnel to stand in the epicenter of his private crisis. The girl's mother worked night shifts at the hospital 3 miles away, leaving Willa an after-school care that apparently hadn't registered her absence yet. Her presence here violated every protocol Pierce's security had established, yet she'd accomplished what his entire infrastructure couldn't. Benny sat perfectly still beside Willa, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the foyer with intelligence that seemed almost unnatural for an animal. The Labrador's posture held alertness without aggression, focus without anxiety, as if he understood the gravity of the situation better than the armed professionals surrounding him. His tail remained motionless, his breathing even and controlled, creating an island of calm in a room vibrating with suppressed panic. Pierce's security chief moved forward, one hand raised to escort the child and her dog out of the private crisis space. His voice carried professional courtesy, wrapped around absolute dismissal, when he addressed Willa with the tone adults used for well-meaning children who didn't understand complex situations. The man's body language broadcast his intention to remove this complication efficiently before returning to legitimate search operations that didn't involve fairy tales about magical dogs. Pierce raised one hand, a minimal gesture that froze Marcus mid-movement and silenced the incipient protests forming on his security chief's lips. Something in Willa's expression stopped him from defaulting to the obvious dismissal, a quality he couldn't name but recognized from negotiations where his life had depended on reading truth through layers of deception. The girl wasn't performing childhood fantasy or seeking attention during a dramatic event. "How did you know my son is missing?" Pierce's question cut through the operational chatter filling the foyer, his voice carrying the controlled intensity that made experienced criminals reconsider their life choices. The room's ambient noise dropped immediately, as personnel registered their employer's shift from crisis management to focused interrogation. Willa met his gaze without the fear or intimidation that typically accompanied direct attention from Pierce Valley. "Everyone at school knows Leo Valley." Willa's response came without hesitation, her small voice steady in a way that reminded Pierce uncomfortably of his own son's occasional stubbornness. "The news vans are parked outside your gates, and the helicopter keeps flying over our neighborhood looking for him. My mom said a prayer for him before she left for work, and I decided Benny and I should help instead of just hoping." The simplicity of her logic carried an implicit criticism that Pierce felt like a physical weight against his chest. While he'd mobilized expensive resources and sophisticated technology, this child had simply decided that action trumped prayer and walked into a dangerous situation with nothing but a dog and absolute conviction. Her courage existed in a different category than the professional competence surrounding him, born from innocence rather than training. Marcus stepped closer to Pierce, lowering his voice to a register meant for private consultation during sensitive operations. "Sir, we need to maintain operational focus. The child means well, but we can't afford distractions when every minute counts." The property manager's hand gestured subtly toward the bank of monitors, displaying search grid progress, thermal imaging results, and probability calculations that grew grimmer with each passing moment. Pierce's jaw tightened as he processed the reasonable advice that conflicted with an instinct he couldn't articulate or defend rationally. His entire professional life had been built on calculated risk assessment, on distinguishing genuine opportunity from attractive distraction, on knowing when to trust information and when to dismiss it as noise. Yet something about Willa's presence here felt less like interruption, and more like answer to a question he hadn't known how to ask. "Does your dog have search and rescue training?" The question came from Pierce's head of security, a former military specialist whose skepticism radiated through every syllable despite his professional courtesy. His arms crossed over his tactical vest as he studied Benny with the expression of someone evaluating equipment that probably wouldn't meet specifications. The Labrador's lack of official vest or handler credentials clearly registered as disqualifying factors in the man's assessment. Willa shook her head, her dark hair swaying with the movement, completely unbothered by the implicit dismissal in the security chief's question and posture. "Benny doesn't have fancy training, but we walk by the lake every single day after school, and we play tracking games in the forest where the trail starts. He can find anything I hide there, and he never forgets a scent once he's learned it, even weeks later." The security chief's expression shifted toward patient condescension, the look professionals gave civilians who didn't understand why amateur enthusiasm couldn't replace systematic expertise and proper equipment. He opened his mouth to deliver what would clearly be a polite but firm explanation of why children's games didn't translate to actual search operations during life-threatening emergencies. Pierce raised his hand again, cutting off the response before it could form into words that would end this conversation permanently. "You said your dog can track my son anywhere." Pierce moved closer to Willa, lowering himself slightly to bring his eyes closer to her level, without quite kneeling on the marble floor. His voice dropped to the tone he used for final negotiations where truth became the only currency that mattered, and lies cost more than anyone could afford. "That's not the same as saying you want to help search. You're claiming specific capability, absolute rather than hopeful. Why?" The question hung between them with weight that exceeded its simple construction, creating a moment where everything could shift toward dismissal or unprecedented trust. Pierce's security personnel exchanged glances that communicated their collective doubt about entertaining a child's claims during genuine crisis, their professional training screaming that this represented distraction from legitimate search operations. Yet something in Pierce's posture suggested he was operating on instinct that had kept him alive through decades of navigating situations where conventional wisdom proved fatally insufficient. The foyer's tension crystallized around this improbable negotiation between powerful man and determined child, both refusing to retreat from positions that made no rational sense, but felt emotionally undeniable. Willa's free hand moved to her backpack's front pocket, her fingers extracting something small that caught the chandelier's light as she held it up for Pierce's inspection. The object revealed itself as a small brass compass attached to a worn leather cord, the kind of simple navigation tool that predated GPS technology by centuries. "My mom gave me this when she adopted me. She said getting lost is only permanent if you stop trying to find your way back." Benny and I practice finding our way back from everywhere we go, mapping everything we see, remembering every path and landmark. We don't get lost anymore, and we're really good at finding things that are lost, because we understand how being lost actually works when you're scared and alone. And Willa reached into her purple backpack, pulling out a small red notebook with worn edges that suggested frequent handling and genuine use, rather than pristine preparation. She flipped it open to a page covered in careful child's handwriting, columns of dates and locations with small sketches of trees and trail markers. "I keep track of everywhere we walk, and everything Benny finds. Last Tuesday we walked past your house's back gate, and Leo was playing near the fence with a soccer ball." Pierce's breath caught as Willa continued, her finger tracing down the notebook page to a specific entry that included a rough sketch of the estate's eastern perimeter. "Benny went up to the fence because Leo called him over and pet him through the bars for like 5 whole minutes. Benny remembers him perfectly. I know because this morning when the news said Leo was missing, I showed Benny his picture and he got all excited and went to the door like he wanted to go find his friend right then." The room's energy shifted as Pierce's security personnel processed the implications of what this child had just revealed with her careful documentation and logical presentation. She hadn't arrived with vague hope or childish optimism about magical dog abilities, but with specific evidence of scent familiarity and location knowledge. Her tracking games in the forest weren't random play, but systematic practice in the exact terrain where Leo had vanished, giving Benny environmental advantage over search dogs brought in from outside the area. Pierce stood abruptly, his decision crystallizing into immediate action. "Get me something Leo wore today." His command eliminated discussion, transforming impossible suggestion into operational reality. Marcus moved toward the stairs without hesitation, professional training overriding his obvious skepticism. The security chief's protest died unspoken as he registered Pierce's expression, that particular configuration of features signaling absolute decision. The man stepped back, hand moving to his radio to alert perimeter teams. Years of working for Pierce had taught him when argument became professionally hazardous, when his employer's judgment entered territory where logic took secondary position. Willa knelt beside Benny, her small hands moving over the Labrador's head with practiced gentleness. She whispered something too quiet for Pierce to hear, her lips close to the dog's ear. Benny's tail moved in a single deliberate wag that suggested understanding rather than generic happiness. The exchange held intimacy that reminded Pierce of Leo's own whispered conversations with animals. Marcus returned with Leo's jacket, the lightweight blue windbreaker the boy had worn during his supervised garden time. The property manager held it carefully by the collar, preserving scent integrity through instinct rather than belief. Pierce took the jacket, the fabric still carrying his son's warmth, triggering a wave of fear he forced down through sheer will. Pierce crouched in front of Benny, holding the jacket at the dog's level, watching for response that would either confirm or destroy Willa's claim. The Labrador's entire body went rigid with attention, his nose working over the fabric with intensity. Benny's eyes locked onto the jacket, then swung toward the foyer's eastern doors, his body leaning in that direction with unmistakable intent. "He's got it." Willa's voice carried quiet triumph, satisfaction of someone whose truth had been validated against adult skepticism. She stood, one hand moving to Benny's collar, her body positioning suggesting readiness to move immediately. He knows Leo's scent perfectly now, and he wants to start tracking right away before the trail gets any older. Pierce's security chief stepped forward, professional obligation overriding learned deference. "Sir, if you're serious about this, we need proper protocols. The child cannot go into potentially hostile territory without protection." His words carried weight of someone whose job included protecting Pierce from his own impulses. "We can't risk your personal safety on an unverified tracking method during active crisis. I'm going with them." Pierce's statement allowed no discussion, his tone carrying finality that ended negotiations. He moved toward the eastern doors, his polished shoes clicking against marble that gave way to stone. The temperature had dropped since Leo's disappearance, the lake visible in the distance throwing back sunlight that seemed grotesquely cheerful. Willa led Benny through the estate's eastern gate, the Labrador's posture shifting from controlled patience to active purpose. The dog's nose dropped to the ground, sweeping in methodical patterns that looked random, but clearly followed internal logic. Pierce followed 3 steps behind, flanked by 2 security personnel who'd materialized with weapons visible, and expressions broadcasting readiness for any emerging threat. The forest's edge approached quickly, the tree line marking transition from Pierce's controlled environment into natural chaos. Benny paused at the boundary, his head lifting to scent the air, body language communicating information to Willa. The girl's hand touched the Labrador's head briefly, a gesture of encouragement, before Benny plunged forward into the undergrowth with purpose. The search dogs had covered this area already, their handlers reporting negative results that had shifted probability calculations toward the lake's grim possibilities. Yet Benny moved with certainty that contradicted those professional assessments, his path deviating from established search grids. The Labrador's confidence became infectious, transforming skeptical security personnel into believers, despite their training telling them this couldn't work. 20 minutes into the forest, Benny's behavior shifted from methodical tracking to something more urgent, his pace increasing. Willa struggled slightly to keep up with the dog's stronger pulls against her grip, her small legs working harder. Pierce moved closer instinctively, ready to assist if the girl lost her hold on Benny, though she showed no signs of releasing her dog. "He's getting close to something." Willa's breathless announcement carried certainty that Pierce desperately wanted to believe. The girl's face showed concentration rather than strain, her attention focused on reading Benny's signals through connection that bypassed language. He's doing his almost there behavior, the way he acts right before he finds what we've been tracking. Leo is nearby. The forest opened into a small clearing where an old hunting shelter stood half-collapsed against years of neglect. Pierce's security had noted its existence on property maps, but dismissed it as too obvious for genuine hiding. The structure's door hung crooked on rusted hinges, gaps in the wooden walls allowing afternoon light to penetrate the interior darkness. Benny lunged forward with sudden force, nearly pulling Willa off her feet in his urgency to reach the shelter. The Labrador's bark broke the forest silence, a sharp declaration of success that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. Pierce's heart hammered against his ribs as he moved past Willa, his security personnel flanking him with weapons drawn. "Leo!" Pierce's voice cracked on his son's name, fear and hope combining into something that hurt worse than either emotion separately. The shelter's interior revealed itself slowly as his eyes adjusted to the dimness. Movement came from the far corner, a small figure shifting against the wall, and Pierce's entire world contracted to that single point. Leo sat propped against the shelter's back wall, his left leg extended awkwardly, face streaked with dirt and dried tears. The boy's eyes widened at seeing his father, relief and shame warring across features too young to hide complex emotion. Pierce crossed the space in 3 strides, his hands reaching for his son with gentleness that contradicted his usual controlled precision. "Dad." Leo's voice emerged small and frightened, nothing like the confident boy who'd left for garden supervision 4 hours ago. His arms wrapped around Pierce's neck with desperate strength, his small body trembling against his father's chest. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I just got scared and ran, and then I fell and couldn't walk right." Pierce held his son, one hand cradling Leo's head, the other supporting his back, feeling the rapid heartbeat that confirmed life and safety. Questions crowded his mind, but they could wait, because this moment mattered more than explanations. Leo was alive, conscious, speaking, holding him back with strength that suggested no critical injuries, despite whatever had happened to his leg. Willa appeared in the shelter doorway, Benny pressing against her legs, both of them backlit by afternoon sun filtering through trees. The girl's expression showed satisfaction rather than surprise, as if the successful outcome had been inevitable rather than miraculous. Pierce registered her presence peripherally, still focused primarily on Leo's physical assessment, checking for injuries that might require immediate medical intervention beyond the obvious leg problem. "My ankle's really messed up." Leo's words came between shuddering breaths as adrenaline began wearing off, leaving pain and exhaustion in its wake. He gestured toward his left foot, swollen visibly even through his sneaker, the joint angled slightly wrong. "I was running and didn't see the root, and I went down hard and heard something pop. I tried to walk, but it hurt too much." Pierce's security chief appeared behind Willa, speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating medical response and updating search teams about the successful recovery. His professional mask had cracked slightly, relief visible beneath the tactical composure as he reported their location. The man's gaze moved between Leo and Benny with new respect, his earlier skepticism about the Labrador's abilities completely evaporated by demonstrated results. Willa moved into the shelter, Benny following close, the dog's attention fixed entirely on Leo with intensity suggesting protective instinct rather than simple curiosity. The Labrador approached slowly, his body language gentle despite his size, until his nose touched Leo's free hand. The boy's fingers automatically moved to scratch behind Benny's ears, a smile breaking through his tear-stained face. "You brought Benny." Leo's observation carried wonder that temporarily pushed past his obvious pain and distress. His hand continued moving over the Labrador's head, the contact appearing to ground him emotionally. "I remember him from when he came to our fence. He was so nice, and I wanted to keep petting him, but my tutor called me back inside." "You're Willa, right? From the neighborhood school?" "Yeah, that's me." Willa's response came with a shy smile, her earlier confidence softening into something more childlike, now that the urgent mission had concluded successfully. She moved closer, sitting carefully on the shelter floor beside Leo, her pink dress collecting dust she clearly didn't care about. "Benny remembered you too. When I showed him your picture this morning, he got all excited. That's how I knew he could track you." Pierce processed the exchange, watching his son interact with this girl and her dog who'd achieved what expensive professionals couldn't. The irony wasn't lost on him that a 7-year-old with a pet Labrador had succeeded where tactical experts with sophisticated equipment had failed. His worldview, built on power and resources solving problems, was experiencing uncomfortable recalibration in this collapsed hunting shelter. Medical personnel arrived with equipment, their practiced efficiency transforming the shelter into temporary treatment facility. They assessed Leo's ankle with gentle hands while asking questions about his other symptoms, checking for signs of concussion or internal injuries. Pierce moved back to give them working room, his attention splitting between his son's medical evaluation and Willa's quiet presence in the corner. "How long have you been here, Leo?" The lead medic's question served dual purpose, assessing mental clarity while gathering timeline information. His hands continued their examination, but his eyes watched Leo's face for signs of confusion or delayed cognitive response. The boy's answers would help determine whether the ankle represented his only injury or if less visible damage required hospital evaluation. Leo's face clouded as he processed the question, his expression shifting from relief to something more complicated. I don't know exactly. Maybe 2 hours. I ran from the gardens after I heard them talking, and I just kept running until I couldn't anymore. When I fell, I crawled in here because I didn't know what else to do, and I was scared they might come looking for me. The statement hung in the air, its implications registering with every adult present before the full meaning crystallized into coherent understanding. Leo hadn't simply wandered off or gotten lost during legitimate exploration. He'd been running from something specific, something he'd overheard that frightened him enough to flee without thinking. Pierce's relief began transforming into something colder and more dangerous as protective instinct shifted into interrogative mode. Who were you running from? Pierce's question came carefully controlled, his voice maintaining calm despite the rage beginning to simmer beneath his surface composure. He moved back closer to Leo, one hand resting on his son's shoulder. What did you hear that scared you enough to run into the forest alone? Tell me exactly what happened before you left the gardens. Leo's eyes dropped to his hands, his fingers still tangled in Benny's golden fur, as if the dog's presence provided courage for difficult confession. I was supposed to be studying with Mr. Harrison, but I finished my math early and went outside. I was playing by the east wall, and I heard voices on the other side, near the service entrance. They were talking about taking someone, about money and timing, and how nobody would know until it was too late. The medics continued their work, but Pierce noticed their movements had slowed slightly, their attention divided between professional duties and the boy's revelation. His security chief had frozen completely, his hand moving unconsciously toward his weapon as training responded to threat declaration. Willa remained quiet in her corner, but her arms had wrapped around Benny's neck, her child's instinct recognizing the adult tension filling the small space. I didn't understand everything they said. Leo's voice dropped lower, shame entering his tone as if his incomplete comprehension represented personal failure rather than reasonable limitation. But I heard my name. They said the Valley Boy, and something about Wednesday being perfect because of the schedule change. That's tomorrow. I got really scared because it sounded like they were planning to grab me, so I ran without thinking. Pierce's mind raced through implications, connecting dots that formed a picture far more disturbing than simple missing child scenario. Someone within his organization or close to it had been planning Leo's kidnapping, discussing it openly enough to be overheard by the intended target. The boy's instinct to flee rather than seek help from state security suggested a level of threat perception that questioned trust in available protection. Did you recognize the voices? The question came from Pierce's security chief, his tactical training overriding his usual deference to let his employer lead interrogations. His body had shifted into combat readiness posture, his eyes scanning the shelter's entrance as if expecting immediate threat. Any identifying characteristics, speech patterns, specific words that might help us identify who was talking? This is critical, Leo. Leo shook his head, frustration evident in his expression at his inability to provide more useful intelligence. They were muffled because of the wall, and I was kind of far away. One voice was deeper, like a grown man's voice. The other was higher, maybe younger. They weren't yelling or anything, just talking normally, which made it scarier somehow because they sounded so calm about planning something really bad. Pierce's mind cataloged every detail Leo provided, building profiles of potential conspirators within his organization's structure. The service entrance represented access point used primarily by maintenance staff and delivery personnel, a rotating cast of faces that changed weekly. Wednesday's schedule change referred to Leo's modified tutoring arrangement, information known only to household staff and close security personnel, narrowing the suspect pool considerably. You did the right thing running. Pierce's words came deliberately, validating his son's instinct, while suppressing his own fury at circumstances that forced a child to flee rather than trust protection. His hand squeezed Leo's shoulder gently, offering physical reassurance that his father's anger wasn't directed at him. Your survival instinct kept you safe when nothing else could. The medics finished their preliminary assessment, declaring Leo stable enough for transport, but requiring hospital evaluation for the ankle. They prepared a stretcher, their movements efficient despite the cramped space and complicated emotional atmosphere. Willa watched the process with quiet attention, Benny still pressed against her side, both of them somehow integral to the situation, despite being civilians in what had become a security crisis. Pierce stood, his body unfolding to full height as decision trees branched through his consciousness at computational speed. Leo needed immediate medical care and secure location away from the compromised estate. The conspirators needed identification and neutralization before Wednesday's window closed, and they either fled or attempted alternative action. Willa and her dog required protection and probably reward, though standard payment felt inadequate for saving his son's life. "Marcus." Pierce's voice carried command that brought his property manager to immediate attention, the man's expression shifting into receptive mode that anticipated complex instructions. "I want security footage from the service entrance reviewed for the past 72 hours. Cross-reference all personnel present during Leo's garden time against voice analysis software." Someone talked openly enough to be overheard, which suggests either arrogance or assumption of privacy that implies familiarity with property layout. The property manager nodded, already pulling out his phone to initiate the requested analysis. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, sending encrypted messages to the estate's security operations center. Pierce noticed the slight tension in Marcus's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he processed the implications of internal threat, wondering perhaps if his own position faced scrutiny in the investigation that would necessarily follow. Pierce turned his attention to Willa, who'd remained remarkably composed throughout the adult crisis unfolding around her. The girl sat cross-legged on the shelter floor, her pink dress dusty but her posture erect, one hand maintaining constant contact with Benny's head. Her presence represented complication Pierce hadn't anticipated, a witness to family vulnerability and security failure that would normally require careful management through his usual methods of ensuring silence through intimidation or compensation. "Willa, I owe you more than I can properly express right now." Pierce lowered himself to her eye level, his voice losing its command edge in favor of genuine gratitude. "You saved my son when trained professionals couldn't. That kind of debt doesn't get repaid with money, but I'd like to start by making sure you and Benny get home safely. Your mother must be worried sick by now." Willa's eyes widened slightly as reality apparently crashed back into her consciousness, her adventure's successful conclusion giving way to recognition of consequences awaiting at home. "Oh no, Mom's going to be so upset. I left after-school care without telling anyone, and she's probably got like 1,000,000 messages from them by now. She works really hard, and I just made everything worse by disappearing to help Leo." The girl's distress carried authenticity that bypassed Pierce's usual cynicism about human motivation and expressed emotion. Willa genuinely feared her mother's reaction, not from threat of physical punishment, but from disappointing someone she clearly loved and didn't want to burden further. Her concern for her mother's worry outweighed pride in her own accomplishment, revealing character depth that impressed Pierce more than her dog's tracking abilities had. "I'll handle your mother." Pierce's promise carried weight of someone accustomed to solving problems through direct intervention, regardless of conventional boundaries. He pulled out his phone, glancing at his security chief with silent question. The man understood immediately, moving to coordinate contact information for Willa's mother through whatever databases would yield results fastest, professional efficiency overriding normal privacy concerns during crisis resolution. Leo was being secured to the stretcher, the medics working with careful gentleness that suggested they understood their patient's father's capacity for displeasure if rough handling caused additional distress. The boy's eyes tracked Willa and Benny, his expression showing reluctance to leave the girl who'd orchestrated his rescue. Pierce recognized the look from his own childhood, that desperate desire to maintain connection with someone who'd proven trustworthy in a moment when trust felt impossible. "Can Willa visit me?" Leo's question emerged hesitant, as if expecting refusal but unable to contain the request. His fingers gripped the stretcher's edge, knuckles white with tension that had nothing to do with physical pain. "I want to thank her properly, and Benny too. They saved my life, Dad. If they hadn't come, I'd probably still be out here scared and alone." Pierce processed the request through multiple filters simultaneously, assessing security implications, emotional necessity, and practical logistics of bringing civilian child into his protected world. His instinct said no reflexively, protecting Leo from outside connections that could become vulnerabilities or complications. But the same instinct that had trusted Willa's impossible claim about Benny's tracking abilities suggested that isolation might be a greater danger than controlled connection. "We'll arrange something once Leo's settled, and the security situation is resolved." Pierce's response split the difference between outright refusal and immediate agreement, buying time for proper vetting and arrangement. His eyes met Willa's, seeing the girl's careful hope and Leo's visible relief. "You have my word that you'll be able to visit Willa. The Valley family pays its debts, and we owe you more than a simple thank you." The stretcher lifted, medics carrying Leo toward the forest path where emergency vehicle waited beyond the tree line. Pierce followed, his hand resting briefly on his son's head in passing gesture of reassurance and possession both. Willa and Benny fell into step beside him, the girl's shorter legs requiring occasional quick steps to maintain pace, her determination to see the rescue through to its conclusion evident in her focused expression. They emerged from the forest into late afternoon sun that painted everything gold, the beauty of the moment contrasting sharply with its traumatic origins. Emergency vehicles clustered at the tree line, their lights creating strobing patterns across the manicured lawn, separating wilderness from civilization. Personnel moved with organized purpose, transforming Leo's recovery from theoretical success into documented reality through photographs, measurements, and official reports that would become part of whatever investigation Pierce ordered into the security breach. A black sedan pulled up as they reached the vehicles, its windows tinted dark enough to hide occupants, but its expensive lines suggesting official estate transportation. Pierce's security chief opened the rear door, gesturing for Willa to enter. The girl hesitated, her hand tightening on Benny's collar, her expression showing sudden uncertainty about accepting rides from powerful strangers, despite the crisis context that had brought them together. "This will take you directly home to your mother." Pierce's voice carried reassurance without condescension, acknowledging Willa's smart hesitation about getting into unfamiliar vehicles. "My driver knows your address, and I'll be calling your mother personally within the next 10 minutes to explain exactly what happened and why you're in my car. You're not in trouble, Willa. You're a hero who deserves safe escort home after accomplishing something remarkable." Willa nodded slowly, her trust given cautiously but given nonetheless, as she climbed into the sedan's leather interior with Benny following. The Labrador settled beside her on the seat, his bulk taking up considerable space, but his presence clearly providing comfort that made the strange situation tolerable. Pierce closed the door gently, watching through tinted glass as the girl's small figure disappeared from view, already composing in his mind the conversation he'd need to have with her mother. The sedan pulled away smoothly, its departure marking the end of the immediate crisis and the beginning of much more complicated aftermath. Pierce turned toward the ambulance where Leo waited, his son's frightened face visible through the rear window. The boy had been found alive and relatively unharmed, but the conspiracy that had driven him into the forest remained operational, a cancer within Pierce's organization that required excision before it metastasized further. The hospital's private wing provided security and discretion Pierce required for his family's medical care, its corridors empty of press and curious onlookers. Leo had been admitted directly to a private room where orthopedic specialists confirmed the ankle injury as severe sprain rather than fracture, painful but not requiring surgical intervention. The boy slept now under sedation, his face peaceful in contrast to the fear-streaked expression he'd worn in the hunting shelter. Pierce stood at the window watching night descend over the city, his phone pressed to his ear as it rang through to Cynthia Morrison's number. His security team had provided comprehensive background on Willa's mother within 20 minutes of the request, painting picture of single parent working double shifts to support her adopted daughter. The information created context for Willa's earlier distress about disappointing her mother, revealing dedication that Pierce recognized as mirror to his own fierce protectiveness of Leo. "Hello?" The woman's voice came breathless and sharp with anxiety, clearly expecting bad news given the unknown number appearing during her daughter's unexplained absence. Background noise suggested hospital environment, the acoustic signature of institutional spaces Pierce had learned to identify through unfortunate necessity. "If this is about Willa, please just tell me where she is. The care center called an hour ago, saying she never showed up, and nobody knows anything. Ms. Morrison, this is Pierce Valley." Pierce let the name register, watching through his reflection in the window, as the woman's intake of breath became audible over the phone connection. His reputation preceded him in ways both useful and complicating, creating automatic assumptions about why he might be calling. "Your daughter is safe, and currently being driven to your home in one of my vehicles. She's unharmed, and actually deserves recognition rather than punishment for what she accomplished this afternoon." Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before Cynthia found her voice again. The quality shifted from panic to confusion, with underlying anger beginning to surface. "Why is my 7-year-old daughter with you? What exactly happened that involved Willa with someone of your reputation? I need to know right now if she's actually safe, or if I should be contacting police immediately." The protective aggression in her voice impressed Pierce despite the implicit threat her words carried. A mother-bear response that suggested she'd challenge even dangerous men if her daughter's welfare required it. Her knowledge of his reputation meant she understood exactly who she was speaking to, yet fear for Willa overrode any self-preservation instinct that might normally temper confrontation with someone of Pierce's position. That kind of courage deserved respect and honest explanation, rather than the carefully crafted half-truths he typically employed. My son Leo disappeared from our estate this afternoon, under circumstances that mobilized significant search resources without success. Pierce delivered the facts plainly, without embellishment or defensive justification for his security's failure. Willa arrived at my gate with her dog and claimed Benny could track Leo. I had no logical reason to believe her, but I chose to trust her anyway. She and her Labrador found my son in less than 30 minutes, when trained professionals with expensive equipment had failed completely. He heard Cynthia's breathing change as she processed the information, likely reconciling the story with what she knew of her daughter's daily routine and capabilities. Willa and Benny do tracking games in the forest near the lake. She keeps a notebook of everywhere they walk, every game they play. I thought it was just innocent play, her way of bonding with the dog I could barely afford to feed properly, but got her anyway because she needed something stable in her life. The admission carried layers of meaning Pierce recognized from his own parenting struggles. The guilt of insufficient resources combined with desperate desire to provide normalcy and happiness regardless of cost. Cynthia's voice held exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, the emotional depletion of single parenthood conducted without safety net or backup. Her defensive tone had softened slightly, but wariness remained as she navigated conversation with someone whose world operated by different rules than hers. Those games saved my son's life. Pierce stated it as fact rather than gratitude, acknowledging debt without diminishing through sentimentality. Leo was injured and frightened, hiding in a collapsed hunting shelter where our search patterns never would have found him in time. Willa's careful attention to detail, her training of Benny, and her courage in approaching my home during a crisis accomplished what money and professional expertise couldn't. I owe her more than I can adequately repay. Cynthia made a sound that might have been laugh or sob, the acoustic ambiguity suggesting emotions too complicated for clear categorization. That sounds like Willa. She notices everything, remembers details I forget immediately, and has this fierce need to help people even when it's not her responsibility. I've been trying to teach her appropriate boundaries, but apparently those lessons didn't prevent her from inserting herself into your family's emergency. Her lack of boundaries saved Leo's life. Pierce repeated the central truth that overrode normal concerns about children's appropriate behavior limitations. I'm calling to explain her absence, to assure you she's safe, and to request permission to thank her properly once the immediate crisis resolves. My security will ensure she reaches your home safely, and I'd like to arrange a meeting between our families when circumstances permit. Your daughter deserves recognition for extraordinary courage and capability. The phone line carried sounds of movement, possibly Cynthia leaving her work area for more private conversation space. Mr. Valley, I appreciate you explaining this personally, rather than having your people handle it. That shows respect I didn't expect given our different social positions. But I need to be very clear about something before we discuss any future meetings or recognition. Her voice had shifted into tone Pierce recognized from his own negotiations, the sound of someone establishing non-negotiable boundaries before proceeding with discussion. He respected the tactical positioning, the refusal to be overwhelmed by gratitude or intimidated by power differential. Cynthia Morrison was protecting her daughter through verbal contract establishment, ensuring understanding preceded agreement. Willa is 7 years old, and she's been through enough instability in her early life before I adopted her. Cynthia's words carried weight of someone who'd considered these points long before this specific conversation. I work hard to give her normal childhood despite our financial limitations. I don't want her exposed to danger, pulled into adult situations beyond her comprehension, or made to feel that she's somehow special because she happened to help in a crisis. She needs to remain a regular child with regular expectations. Pierce processed the implicit warning beneath the explicit statement, recognizing a mother's attempt to protect her daughter from the complications that came with Pierce's world. Cynthia was preemptively establishing that gratitude couldn't become obligation, that debt wouldn't transform into ownership or expectation of future service. Her protective instinct matched his own regarding Leo, creating unexpected common ground between their vastly different circumstances. I understand completely, and I share your concern about maintaining childhood normalcy despite extraordinary circumstances. Pierce's response carried sincerity, rather than tactical agreement, genuine recognition of parenting priority that transcended social class. My son Leo specifically asked if Willa could visit him. They formed connection during the rescue that I believe would benefit both children. I'm proposing supervised friendship, not recruitment into situations beyond age-appropriate boundaries. Cynthia's hesitation transmitted clearly across the phone connection, her internal debate between protecting Willa from potential complications and allowing her daughter to receive recognition she'd earned. Leo is your son, which means anything involving him automatically involves your world and its dangers. How can you promise me that letting Willa visit won't expose her to threats she shouldn't have to navigate at 7 years old? The question cut to the core of Pierce's own parenting struggle. The tension between his professional life's necessary violence and his desire to preserve Leo's innocence as long as possible. He couldn't offer guarantees without lying, couldn't promise complete safety when his son's kidnapping attempt proved that danger infiltrated even supposedly secure spaces. Honesty required acknowledging risk while proposing mitigation, rather than pretending threat didn't exist. I can't promise complete safety because today proved my security isn't infallible. Pierce's admission cost him pride, but purchased credibility that deflection would have forfeited. What I can promise is that any interaction between our children will happen in controlled environments with appropriate supervision. Willa saved Leo's life, and he wants to thank her personally. That's a normal human response that shouldn't be denied because of my complicated professional circumstances. The hospital's private wing remained quiet around Pierce, his vigil at Leo's bedside, interrupted only by this crucial negotiation with a woman who had every reason to refuse his request. He recognized the irony of someone with his power needing to ask permission from a single mother working night shifts, but genuine respect required acknowledging her authority over her daughter, regardless of his capacity to pressure or manipulate alternative outcomes. The car with Willa should arrive at your home shortly. Pierce redirected toward immediate practical concerns, giving Cynthia space to process larger questions while addressing her urgent need to physically confirm her daughter's safety. My driver will wait until you've spoken with Willa and confirmed she's unharmed. I'd appreciate if you'd take my card with my personal number, allowing direct contact if you decide supervised visits between the children are acceptable. No pressure, no obligation. Just an open door if you choose to walk through it. Pierce ended the call with Cynthia as his security chief entered Leo's hospital room, the man's expression carrying the grim satisfaction of someone who'd found answers that confirmed worst suspicions. He held a tablet displaying surveillance footage, his finger poised to play the relevant section. The discovery had come faster than Pierce expected, suggesting either obvious guilt or insider knowledge that made concealment unnecessary until the planned Wednesday execution. We found them. The security chief's voice carried controlled anger that matched Pierce's own simmering fury at the betrayal. 2 men. Service entrance. Exactly during Leo's garden time. Voice analysis matches the deeper and higher tones Leo described. One of them is Marcus's assistant, David something. The other is our perimeter security guard, Jackson, who's been with us for 8 months. Pierce moved away from the window, his attention focusing entirely on the tablet screen as footage played. 2 men stood near the service entrance, their body language casual despite the content of their conversation. Audio had been enhanced, bringing their words into sharp clarity that eliminated any possibility of misunderstanding or innocent interpretation. They discussed Wednesday's schedule change, pickup logistics, and the substantial payment awaiting them upon successful delivery of the Valley Boy to unnamed clients. The betrayal's scope crystallized as Pierce watched Jackson check his surroundings with professional awareness before continuing the conversation. This wasn't impulsive criminality or desperate financial need driving poor judgment, but calculated conspiracy that implied larger organization behind the local operatives. Someone had researched Leo's schedule thoroughly enough to know about tutoring changes, suggesting surveillance that predated Jackson's 8-month employment, or information sharing that reached deeper into the household staff than Pierce had imagined possible. Where are they now? Pierce's question came cold and precise, his mind already moving through response scenarios that ranged from legal prosecution to extrajudicial solutions that his position made feasible. The tablet screen showed timestamp from earlier in the day, meaning hours had passed since the conversation. Jackson might still be on shift, unaware that Leo's escape and recovery had exposed the conspiracy, while David could be anywhere within the estate's extensive grounds. The security chief's expression turned grim. Jackson completed his shift and left the property at 6 p.m., standard departure time. David called in sick 20 minutes ago, claiming sudden illness that requires immediate departure. He's packing his quarters now, moving faster than someone genuinely ill would manage. Marcus is monitoring the situation, waiting for your instructions on whether to detain or follow. Pierce processed the tactical situation rapidly, weighing benefits of immediate detention against advantages of surveillance leading to higher-level conspirators. David's sudden departure suggested either genuine illness, coinciding unfortunately with timing, or awareness that Leo's recovery might expose the plot sooner than Wednesday's planned execution. The assistant's flight impulse could indicate panic or tactical repositioning, each possibility requiring different response. Detain David immediately but quietly. Pierce's decision prioritized intelligence gathering over dramatic confrontation. I want him isolated in the estate's security office with no external communication capability. Don't arrest him formally, just ensure he can't contact anyone outside. Jackson is more complicated since he's already off property, but I want his location tracked continuously. He may lead us to whoever's financing this operation. The security chief nodded, his fingers already moving across the tablet to transmit coded instructions to the estate's security team. His tactical training showed in the efficiency of his movements, the economy of communication that conveyed complex orders through abbreviated phrases. Pierce watched the man work, recognizing competence while simultaneously questioning whether additional conspirators existed within the security structure itself, whether trust in any personnel remained justified after today's revelations. There's more. The security chief's words stopped Pierce's internal security audit, redirecting attention to additional information that apparently complicated the already disturbing situation. We pulled David's financial records through our standard background monitoring. He received a wire transfer of $15,000 3 weeks ago from an offshore account. The timing aligns with when we announced Leo's schedule change to household staff. The money trail opened investigative pathways Pierce could exploit through his extensive network of contacts operating in legal gray areas. Offshore accounts required setup and sophistication beyond what low-level conspirators typically managed independently, suggesting professional facilitation or established criminal infrastructure. Someone with resources and connections had targeted Leo specifically, invested money in advance, and recruited from within Pierce's supposedly vetted personnel. Pierce moved to Leo's bedside, looking down at his sleeping son, the boy's peaceful expression contrasting sharply with the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed both their lives. The sedation kept Leo unaware of the ongoing investigation, protecting him temporarily from knowing how deeply betrayal had penetrated their home security. That innocence couldn't last, but Pierce would preserve it for a few hours longer while he dealt with the uglier necessities of protection and response. I want Marcus in this room immediately. Pierce's command carried urgency that suggested time-sensitive decisions requiring his property manager's input or presence. The security chief moved toward the door, hand already reaching for his radio. Pierce held up one finger, stopping the man before he could exit. Wait, before you bring him here, I need you to run the same financial analysis on Marcus that you ran on David. Check everything, every transaction, every deposit. I need to know if we're looking at isolated betrayal or systemic compromise. The security chief's expression showed he'd already considered that exact possibility, his tactical mind running parallel calculations about trust and verification. Already initiated, sir. Marcus's records are being pulled now, along with every other staff member who had knowledge of Leo's schedule change. We'll have preliminary results within the hour. Complete analysis by morning. Standard protocol is to suspect everyone until evidence proves otherwise. Pierce appreciated the thoroughness even as it forced confrontation with paranoid necessity. The recognition that his son's safety required treating every familiar face as potential threat until proven innocent. The isolation felt crushing, knowing he couldn't trust the people he'd hired specifically to create trustworthy environment. His power had built walls and hired guards, but those same structures had become vulnerabilities that enemies exploited through infiltration. Sir, there's one more thing you should know before I bring Marcus up. The security chief's tone shifted into register, suggesting personal discomfort with the information he needed to convey. David's phone records show multiple calls to a number registered to a Sandra Morrison at Mercy General Hospital. That's Cynthia Morrison's workplace. I don't have details about the content, but the connection exists between our conspirator and Willa's mother. The revelation hit Pierce like physical impact, forcing complete recalibration of assumptions he'd made about the rescue's serendipitous nature. Willa's appearance at his gate with tracking dog suddenly looked less like innocent heroism and more like orchestrated involvement, her mother's connection to David creating suspicious coincidence. Pierce's instinct screamed that the timing was too perfect, that genuine coincidence rarely aligned this precisely with conspiracy and need. Pull everything on Cynthia Morrison immediately. Pierce's voice had gone flat and cold, protective fury redirecting toward new target, as possibilities reconstructed themselves into darker patterns. Employment history, financial records, personal associations, everything. I want to know if her adoption of Willa connects to this in any way, if the dog's tracking games were preparation rather than innocent play. Get me answers before that car reaches her home with her daughter. The security chief departed rapidly, leaving Pierce alone with his sleeping son and spiraling suspicions that transformed gratitude into potential betrayal. Willa's heroism might have been genuine, or it might have been theater designed to gain access to Pierce's inner circle, to establish trust that would make future manipulation easier. Cynthia's protective boundary setting during their phone conversation could have been genuine maternal concern, or tactical positioning by someone playing longer game. Pierce pulled out his phone, staring at Cynthia's number in his recent calls list, his finger hovering over the callback button. He needed to know the truth about her connection to David, needed to understand whether phone calls represented genuine friendship or conspiracy coordination. But calling now, before having complete information, risked alerting her to his suspicions if she was involved, potentially destroying investigative advantage. The uncertainty gnawed at him, forcing patience his instincts rejected during crisis requiring immediate protective action. Leo stirred in his sleep, a small sound of discomfort escaping despite the sedation keeping him unconscious. Pierce moved to his son's side automatically, his hand smoothing back the boy's hair in gesture of comfort and reassurance. Whatever Cynthia Morrison's involvement might prove to be, Leo's safety remained the absolute priority that overrode every other consideration, including Pierce's reluctance to believe that Willa's rescue might have been something other than miraculous innocent intervention. Pierce's phone vibrated with incoming message from his security chief, the text containing preliminary financial analysis that shattered his darkest suspicions about Cynthia Morrison. The calls between David and Sandra Morrison weren't to Cynthia at all, but to her co-worker at the hospital, a woman who'd apparently been David's girlfriend before their recent breakup. The connection was coincidental rather than conspiratorial, innocent overlap of social circles rather than evidence of coordination between household conspirator and Willa's mother. Relief flooded through Pierce with physical intensity, his shoulders dropping as tension he hadn't fully acknowledged released its grip. He'd been prepared to believe the worst, to transform Willa's heroism into calculated manipulation. But evidence pointed toward the simpler truth that sometimes miracles were just miracles. A 7-year-old girl and her dog had genuinely saved his son through combination of preparation, courage, and timing that owed nothing to conspiracy. The security chief entered with Marcus in tow, the property manager's expression showing confusion about the urgent summons during what should have been operational crisis management time. Pierce studied Marcus carefully, watching for tells that might suggest guilty knowledge or nervous awareness of investigation. The man appeared genuinely bewildered rather than defensive, his body language open rather than guarded, suggesting his financial records would likely clear him of involvement. David has been detained in the security office. Marcus delivered the information efficiently, his confusion evident about why his assistant required detention. He's claiming he felt suddenly ill and needed to leave, but his behavior suggests something more concerning. Should I be aware of specific security concerns regarding my staff that motivated this action? I prefer to understand situations before they escalate beyond my management capability. Pierce gestured toward the tablet his security chief held, indicating Marcus should review the footage that had triggered David's detention. The property manager's face transformed as he watched and listened, professional composure cracking into genuine shock, and then cold anger. His hands gripped the tablet edges tightly, knuckles whitening as he processed his assistant's betrayal, the violation of trust that had occurred under his direct supervision and responsibility. I vetted David personally when I hired him 18 months ago. Marcus's voice carried self-recrimination that Pierce recognized from his own internal dialogue about security failures. His background checked clean, his references were solid, his performance has been exemplary until this sudden illness today. I never suspected he'd be capable of conspiracy against Leo, against this family. This failure is mine, and I take full responsibility for the breach. Pierce raised one hand, cutting off Marcus's spiral into guilty self-flagellation that would accomplish nothing productive. David fooled sophisticated background checks and professional observation for 18 months. Either he's exceptionally skilled at deception, or he was recruited recently by someone who identified him as vulnerable to corruption. Your hiring decision used the best information available at the time. Blame is less important now than extraction of intelligence that leads us to whoever financed this operation. The property manager nodded, his professional training reasserting control over emotional reaction. "What do you need from me regarding David's interrogation? I know his patterns, his associations, his routines better than security personnel who've had minimal direct interaction. I might be able to identify inconsistencies in whatever story he attempts to construct, or recognize references to people and places that would mean nothing to someone without context." Pierce considered the offer, weighing benefit of Marcus's intimate knowledge against potential complications if the property manager's financial analysis revealed concerning patterns. Trust remained conditional until evidence proved otherwise, but completely excluding Marcus from the interrogation might damage working relationship while providing minimal security benefit. Supervised involvement represented reasonable compromise between utility and caution. "You'll participate in the initial interview under security chief's supervision." Pierce established parameters that satisfied multiple concerns simultaneously. "David knows you better than any of us," which creates both advantage and vulnerability. He might reveal more to familiar face, or he might attempt manipulation through established relationship. Either way, your presence provides strategic value if properly managed. But understand that you're also being monitored. Your financial records are under review, and trust is currently provisional rather than absolute. Marcus absorbed the implicit accusation without visible offense, his expression showing understanding rather than hurt pride. "Given the circumstances, that's not only reasonable but necessary. I'd question your judgment if you weren't verifying everyone who had access to Leo's schedule information. My records will show nothing concerning because I'm not involved, but I respect the process that confirms innocence rather than assumes it. Professional paranoia keeps people like Leo safe when personal trust fails." The security chief's phone buzzed, his eyes scanning incoming message before looking up at Pierce with expressions suggesting significant development. "Jackson just made contact with someone at a downtown location we've had under surveillance for unrelated reasons. It's a known meeting point for individuals coordinating illegal activities across multiple territories. We have visual confirmation of the meeting, but the individual Jackson contacted isn't in our current identification database. This suggests larger organization than we initially calculated." Pierce moved to the window, his mind processing implications of Jackson's contact with organized criminal infrastructure. The kidnapping plot wasn't isolated opportunism by corrupted employees, but professional operation backed by resources and networks that transcended simple ransom scenarios. Someone had specifically targeted Leo, invested in recruitment and planning, and connected local operatives to broader criminal support structure. The question became whether Pierce himself was the ultimate target through his son, or if Leo represented value independent of his father's position. "I want full surveillance maintained on Jackson without interruption or detection." Pierce's command carried weight of someone whose patience for half measures had evaporated completely. "Document everyone he contacts, every location he visits, every transaction he makes. The goal is mapping the entire network, rather than simply arresting one operative. We need to understand how deep this reaches, and who ultimately authorized targeting my son, before we move to neutralize the threat permanently." Marcus cleared his throat, his expression suggesting internal debate about whether to voice observation that might be unwelcome. "Sir, with respect, if this organization is sophisticated enough to have downtown coordination points and professional recruitment capability, they'll have contingency plans for operational failures. David's detention and Jackson's surveillance might have already triggered alerts that caused the network to disperse or retaliate. We might be working against countdown we can't see." The observation matched Pierce's own tactical assessment, the recognition that time represented both asset and liability, depending on how adversaries interpreted today's developments. If they believed Leo's escape and recovery were simply fortunate accident rather than security investigation trigger, they might maintain position awaiting next opportunity. But if David or Jackson communicated warning before detention and surveillance began, the network might already be executing withdrawal protocols that would erase evidence and eliminate tracking possibilities. That's why interrogation begins immediately, rather than after we've gathered more surveillance data. Pierce's decision prioritized immediate intelligence over patient network mapping. David doesn't know we've connected him to broader organization yet. He thinks he's been detained for his sudden departure during crisis, not for conspiracy we've already documented. That window of ignorance gives us advantage if we exploit it before he realizes how much we actually know and how thoroughly his operational security has collapsed. The three men moved toward the door, leaving Leo sleeping peacefully under medical supervision while they descended into the estate's security operations center. The facility occupied the mansion's reinforced basement level, featuring monitoring stations, detention cells, and interrogation rooms that technically shouldn't exist in private residence, but did because Pierce's position allowed certain legal flexibilities. David waited in one of those rooms, probably still believing his illness excuse would hold, or that his emergency departure could be explained through creative lying. Pierce paused outside the interrogation room's door, his hand on the handle, his mind cycling through approach strategies. Aggression might break David quickly, but could also trigger defensive lies or panicked silence that yielded nothing useful. Calm professionalism might encourage confession through implied leniency, or it might be interpreted as weakness that emboldened resistance. The optimal approach required reading David's emotional state and adapting dynamically, something Pierce had done countless times in very different contexts, but with remarkably similar psychological dynamics. David sat at a metal table, his hands folded in front of him, his expression showing confusion gradually transforming into concern as time stretched without explanation. The assistant's eyes tracked Pierce's entrance with widening recognition, the realization that the estate's owner had personally involved himself, suggesting severity beyond simple policy violation. Marcus followed, and David's confusion deepened as his direct supervisor entered with expression conveying betrayal and disappointment rather than protective support. "David, we need to discuss your financial situation." Pierce opened with statement that appeared tangential to the detention's apparent cause, watching carefully for micro-expressions that would reveal whether the subject connected to David's guilty knowledge. Specifically, "We're interested in a wire transfer of $15,000 you received 3 weeks ago from an offshore account. The timing is interesting given recent events involving my son's schedule changes and today's unfortunate disappearance." The color drained from David's face with gratifying speed, his hands unclenching and then reclenching tighter, as he processed that his detention wasn't about sudden departure, but about conspiracy exposure. His eyes darted between Pierce and Marcus, calculating possibilities, and finding none that offered escape from the situation closing around him. The assistant's mouth opened and closed twice before sound emerged, his voice higher and thinner than its normal register. "I can explain the money." David's words came rushed and defensive, already positioning for damage control rather than outright denial. "It's not what you think, or maybe it is, but there's context that makes it less bad than it looks. I didn't hurt Leo. I never would have actually let them take him. I just needed the advance payment to cover debts that were going to get me killed if I didn't pay immediately." Pierce remained silent, letting David's panic fill the space with increasingly desperate justifications that revealed more than strategic questioning would extract. The assistant's confession confirmed conspiracy, while simultaneously attempting to minimize his role, painting himself as victim of circumstance rather than active participant. The technique was standard among caught criminals, but its employment this quickly suggested David's psychological fragility under pressure would make complete intelligence extraction feasible. Marcus leaned forward, his expression carrying disappointed mentor rather than hostile interrogator, leveraging their established relationship to encourage fuller confession. "David, I've known you for 18 months. I've trusted you with sensitive information, relied on your competence, recommended you for increased responsibility. Now you're telling me you sold out a child for $15,000? Help me understand how someone I believed in could make that choice, because right now I'm struggling to reconcile the person I knew with what you've apparently become." The personal appeal worked, where aggressive interrogation might have triggered defensive silence, David's face crumpling as shame overwhelmed calculation. "I got into gambling debt with people who don't accept late payments or payment plans. They were going to kill me, Marcus. Not threaten, not intimidate. Actually kill me and make sure everyone knew what happens when you don't pay. The $15,000 barely covered what I owed, but it bought me enough time to maybe figure out how to survive." Pierce processed the information rapidly, recognizing the classic recruitment pattern where criminals identified vulnerable individuals drowning in desperate circumstances. David's gambling addiction had created financial crisis that made him susceptible to corruption, his fear of death overriding ethical boundaries that might have held under less extreme pressure. The organization targeting Leo had done their homework thoroughly, finding exploitable weakness and applying precise leverage. "Who approached you with the offer?" Pierce's question cut through David's self-justifying spiral, redirecting toward actionable intelligence. "Someone had to know about your debt, your position in my household, and Leo's schedule patterns. That's not information that randomly circulates. Someone specifically identified you as recruitment target, which means they were already watching my estate before making contact. I need names, locations, and any identifying details you can remember about every person involved in this conspiracy. David's eyes showed calculation as he weighed cooperation against whatever threats or promises the conspiracy had employed to secure his participation. His hands twisted together on the table, knuckles cracking audibly in the quiet room. If I tell you everything, can you protect me from them? Because they made it very clear what happens to people who talk or fail. The $15,000 was advance payment, but the real money came after successful delivery. Now I've failed, I haven't delivered, and they're going to assume I either betrayed them or am incompetent. Either way, I'm dead unless you can keep me safe. Pierce exchanged glances with his security chief, silent communication passing between them about feasibility and cost of witness protection. David represented valuable intelligence asset whose cooperation could dismantle the entire network threatening Leo, but protecting him required resources and commitment that extended beyond simple monetary expense. The decision balanced tactical advantage against strategic complications of harboring a conspirator who'd actively participated in plot to kidnap Pierce's son. Your safety depends entirely on the value of information you provide. Pierce's response offered no false comfort, but established clear transactional framework. Complete cooperation, verifiable intelligence, and testimony if required equals protective custody and possible relocation. Partial cooperation or lies that waste my time equals delivery to the same people you claim to fear. Choose carefully, because you won't get a second chance to negotiate terms once this conversation ends. David nodded frantically, his survival instinct overriding whatever loyalty or fear the conspiracy had instilled. I was approached by a man named Victor Chen 6 weeks ago at a poker game downtown. He knew exactly how much I owed, knew where I worked, knew about Leo's routine before I'd said anything about it. He presented it as simple information sharing for good money, said I'd just need to confirm schedules and provide occasional updates about security protocols. The kidnapping plan came later, after I'd already taken smaller payments and couldn't back out without admitting I'd already committed crimes. The name Victor Chen, connected to networks Pierce's organization, had intersected with previously in-territory disputes and business conflicts. Chen operated as middle management fixer for larger criminal enterprises, coordinating operations across multiple cities while insulating higher-level principals from direct involvement. His participation confirmed this wasn't random targeting, but strategic operation authorized by serious players with resources to support extended surveillance and recruitment. Chen works for the Kovac organization out of Chicago. Pierce stated it as fact rather than question, watching David's eyes confirm the identification. They've been probing my territory boundaries for 2 years, testing where they might expand operations without triggering open conflict. Targeting Leo represents either ransom play for quick profit or leverage attempt to force territorial concessions. Either motive suggests they've severely miscalculated my likely response to threats against my family. Marcus had gone pale during the exchange, his understanding of criminal organizational dynamics sufficient to recognize the implications. The Kovac organization doesn't back down from confrontations, and they have reputation for escalating rather than retreating when challenged. If they authorized Leo's kidnapping as tactical move, David's failure might trigger more aggressive action rather than withdrawal. We might be looking at the beginning of extended conflict rather than isolated incident that can be contained through limited response. Pierce's jaw tightened as he processed Marcus's accurate assessment of Kovac organizational psychology. Traditional response to attempted kidnapping would involve negotiation or proportional retaliation that maintained rough equilibrium between competing powers. But Leo's involvement transformed calculation into something more primal. Paternal protection instinct that rejected equilibrium in favor of absolute elimination of threat, regardless of broader strategic consequences. I want Victor Chen located and brought to me within 24 hours. Pierce's command acknowledged the likelihood of escalation, while accepting it as necessary cost of protecting his son. I don't care what resources you need to mobilize or what territorial boundaries you need to cross. Chen is the thread connecting David's recruitment to Kovac authorization. Pull that thread hard enough, and their entire operational structure in this region unravels. We're not negotiating or seeking equilibrium. We're dismantling their capacity to threaten my family ever again. The security chief's expression showed grim satisfaction at receiving authorization for aggressive action that his training had prepared him to execute. Chen maintains apartment downtown but cycles through multiple safe houses. We have locations for 3 of them based on previous surveillance. If we move simultaneously on all known addresses, probability of capture is approximately 70%. The remaining 30% splits between him being at unknown location or being warned and fleeing before we arrive. David raised one trembling hand, his voice emerging hesitant as he offered additional information that might improve his protective custody negotiation position. Chen mentioned meeting at a restaurant called Dimitri's every Tuesday and Thursday evening. He said it was neutral ground where business discussions happened without concern about electronic surveillance or surprise interruptions. Tonight is Thursday. If he's maintaining his routine despite operational complications, he might be there now or soon, probably trying to understand what went wrong with Leo's failed kidnapping. Pierce checked his watch, noting the time as approaching 8 p.m., within the window when business dinner at exclusive restaurant would be concluding or transitioning to drinks and private negotiation. Dimitri's is Kovac-affiliated territory, which means any action there risks immediate escalation into open conflict. But it also means Chen might be relaxed rather than defensive, surrounded by friendly territory that creates false sense of security. That psychological advantage might offset the tactical disadvantage of operating in hostile space. The security chief moved toward the door, already coordinating operational details through rapid-fire communications with his tactical team. Pierce followed, leaving Marcus to maintain surveillance over David in the interrogation room. The property manager's relief at being trusted with that responsibility showed in his posture straightening, his professional competence being affirmed despite the betrayal that had occurred under his supervision. "Sir, if we're moving on Chen tonight, I recommend you remain here with Leo rather than participating directly." The security chief's suggestion carried weight of someone whose job included protecting Pierce from his own aggressive instincts. Your presence at Dimitri's transforms tactical extraction into personal confrontation that limits our operational flexibility. Chen is more valuable as intelligence source than as target for your justified anger, and your presence makes the former less likely while guaranteeing the latter. Pierce's instinct rejected the logic, even as his intellect recognized its accuracy. His need to personally confront the man who'd threatened Leo warred with tactical understanding that emotional involvement compromised effectiveness. The internal battle played across his features transparently enough that his security chief waited silently, rather than pressing argument that had already been made sufficiently. Extract Chen alive and functional for interrogation. Pierce's concession came with difficulty, acknowledging operational necessity while asserting standards for execution. I want him capable of providing detailed intelligence about Kovac authorization, operational structure, and any other targets they've identified in my territory or family. But ensure he understands that cooperation is his only path to surviving the next 48 hours. Fear can be remarkably effective at overcoming misplaced loyalty. The security team mobilized with practiced efficiency, their departure leaving Pierce in the hospital's private wing with his sleeping son and spiraling thoughts about how radically his world had shifted in less than 12 hours. This morning, Leo had been safe within supposedly secure estate, living childhood insulated from his father's complicated professional world. Now that illusion lay shattered, replaced by harsh understanding that Pierce's power attracted enemies willing to target innocent children to achieve strategic objectives. Pierce returned to Leo's bedside, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder, feeling the steady breathing that confirmed life and safety in immediate present. The future remained uncertain, threatened by organizations whose territorial ambitions cared nothing for Pierce's desire to protect his child from the violence that defined his professional existence. That collision between paternal love and criminal necessity would require resolution, but solutions remained unclear beyond the immediate tactical response of eliminating current threat through overwhelming force. Dawnlight filtered through the hospital window as Pierce maintained vigil over Leo, his phone displaying steady stream of updates from his security team's operations throughout the night. Victor Chen had been extracted from Dimitri's without significant incident, the speed and precision of the operation catching Kovac's local security before they could mount effective response. Chen now occupied secure location undergoing interrogation that was yielding comprehensive intelligence about the organization's territorial expansion plans and specific authorization for Leo's kidnapping attempt. Leo stirred as consciousness returned gradually, his eyes opening with confused blink before memory reconstructed yesterday's events. His hand moved instinctively toward his injured ankle, before stopping as he registered his father's presence. "Dad, how long have I been asleep? Did they catch the men who were planning to take me? Is Willa okay?" The questions tumbled out with child's priorities that mixed fear, curiosity, and concern for others in ways that made Pierce's chest tighten. You've been asleep about 12 hours. The men responsible are being dealt with through appropriate channels. And yes, Willa is fine, safely home with her mother. She's quite the remarkable young lady, along with that dog of hers. Pierce kept his tone light, despite the weight of unresolved threats still requiring neutralization. Leo's expression showed relief, followed quickly by determination that Pierce recognized from his own reflection. I want to see her again, Dad. Not just to say thank you, but because she's the first kid I've met who actually did something instead of just watching stuff happen. Everyone at my school is so worried about being proper and following rules that they never actually do anything important. Willa just walked into danger because it was the right thing to do. Pierce heard the implicit criticism of the isolated childhood he'd constructed for Leo in name of protection and proper upbringing. His son craved connection with someone who operated by different rules, who demonstrated courage that had nothing to do with wealth or position. Willa's heroism had revealed to Leo what authentic bravery looked like, and it bore no resemblance to the careful, controlled environment Pierce had created to keep his son safe. I spoke with Willa's mother last night. Pierce chose his words carefully, navigating between honesty and age-appropriate disclosure. She's understandably protective, and I respect her concerns about exposing Willa to complications that come with our family. But I believe I can arrange supervised visits that satisfy her boundaries, while allowing you and Willa to develop friendship. These things take time and trust building, Leo. Not everything can be resolved immediately through money or authority. Leo nodded with maturity that seemed advanced beyond his 8 years, perhaps accelerated by yesterday's trauma, or simply revealing character that had always existed beneath the surface. I understand. Willa's mom probably looked you up and saw all the scary stuff people say about you online. If I was a parent, I'd be worried too about letting my kid near someone with your reputation. But she should know that you're not scary to people who don't deserve it. And Willa definitely doesn't deserve anything scary. The observation demonstrated Leo's growing awareness of his father's complicated position in the world, the duality between protective parent and dangerous professional that Pierce had tried unsuccessfully to keep completely separate. Yesterday's events had forced partial merger of those worlds, requiring new framework for their relationship that acknowledged reality rather than maintaining increasingly implausible fiction of complete separation. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation, a nurse entering with breakfast tray and medication for Leo's pain management. Behind her came Pierce's security chief, his expression showing satisfaction, rather than the grim determination that had characterized previous updates. The man waited until the nurse completed her tasks and departed before approaching Pierce with tablet displaying operational summaries. Chen provided comprehensive intelligence in exchange for witness protection and relocation out of Kovach's operational territory. The security chief kept his voice low despite the room's privacy, professional habit ensuring sensitive information remained controlled. The kidnapping plan was authorized as territorial pressure tactic, intended to force your cooperation with their expansion into your distribution networks. They miscalculated your likely response, assuming you'd negotiate rather than retaliate. Chen's cooperation has given us complete mapping of their local infrastructure, which we're systematically dismantling as we speak. Pierce processed the update with grim satisfaction, knowing the dismantling process involved methods that couldn't be discussed in front of Leo regardless of his son's growing awareness. Kovach's response to our counter-operation? The question addressed the inevitable escalation that would follow destruction of their regional network, the organizational pride that would demand response, even when tactical logic suggested cutting losses. Surprisingly restrained so far, the security chief's tone carried suspicion, rather than relief at the organization's lack of immediate retaliation. Our intelligence suggests they're reassessing their approach given how quickly and thoroughly we've neutralized their local presence. Chen's defection exposed vulnerabilities in their operational security that they're now scrambling to address across multiple territories. We may have bought significant breathing room through aggressive response, though I'm maintaining elevated security protocols until their strategic recalculation completes. Leo had been listening quietly, his expression showing that he understood more than Pierce wished about the violent realities underlying the careful language his security chief employed. So they tried to kidnap me to make you do something you didn't want to do, but now they've decided it's too dangerous to keep trying? Does that mean I'm actually safe now? Or just safe until they think of a different plan? The question demonstrated uncomfortable sophistication for an 8-year-old, the kind of strategic thinking that emerged from growing up as son of someone whose profession required constant threat assessment. Pierce wanted to provide simple reassurance that everything would be fine, but Leo deserved honesty about the conditional nature of security in their world. "You're as safe as I can make you, which is very safe, but not absolutely guaranteed." Pierce's response balanced truth with age-appropriate framing. "The people who threatened you have learned that attacking my family costs more than they're willing to pay. That lesson will keep you safe from them, and from anyone else who might consider similar actions. But complete certainty about safety doesn't exist for anyone, Leo. What exists is preparation, vigilance, and demonstrated willingness to protect what matters most." 3 days later, Pierce's estate had been transformed through comprehensive security overhaul that addressed every vulnerability yesterday's conspiracy had exposed. New personnel had been vetted through multiple independent background services, surveillance systems had been upgraded with redundant monitoring, and protocols had been revised to eliminate single points of failure. The estate felt simultaneously more secure and more obviously fortified, the visible presence of protection creating psychological comfort despite aesthetic compromise. Willa arrived mid-afternoon with her mother, the two of them passing through new security checkpoints, with combination of nervousness and curiosity. Cynthia's expression showed she'd wrestled with this decision extensively, her maternal protectiveness warring with recognition that denying Willa this experience would punish her daughter for heroism. Pierce met them at the main entrance personally, a gesture of respect that acknowledged Cynthia's legitimate concerns about exposing Willa to his world. "Thank you for trusting me with your daughter's safety." Pierce's greeting contained none of his usual command presence, just genuine appreciation for trust that had been earned through difficult circumstances. Leo's been asking about Willa constantly since he woke up. The doctors cleared him for limited activity, and I thought perhaps the garden would provide neutral space for them to visit without overwhelming atmosphere. Cynthia nodded slowly, her hand resting protectively on Willa's shoulder, even as she allowed this meeting to proceed. 30 minutes, with us present the entire time. Willa's been excited but also nervous about seeing Leo again. Yesterday, she was operating on pure adrenaline and purpose. Today, she's just a 7-year-old meeting a new friend in very unusual circumstances. Please help her remember she's allowed to be a normal kid, not a hero expected to live up to impossible standards. The request echoed Pierce's own concerns about Leo's developing identity in wake of traumatic experience. Both children had been thrust into adult situations that could shape their self-concepts in damaging ways, if not carefully managed. The garden visit represented an attempt to normalize their connection, to allow friendship to develop from shared experience without being defined entirely by that experience's dramatic nature. Leo waited in the eastern garden where his disappearance had originated, the location's significance not lost on Pierce, but chosen deliberately to reclaim space that had become associated with fear. The boy sat on a stone bench with his injured ankle elevated, his face lighting up with genuine joy when Willa appeared. Benny bounded ahead of his young owner, the Labrador's tail wagging enthusiastically as he recognized Leo from their brief fence meeting and yesterday's rescue. "You came?" Leo's greeting carried relief that suggested he doubted whether Willa would actually appear despite promises. "I wanted to thank you properly for finding me. Everyone keeps saying how amazing it was that Benny tracked me when professional search dogs couldn't. You guys are basically famous now. At least in my head, where I keep replaying what happened." Willa smiled shyly, her hand moving to Benny's head in gesture Pierce recognized as grounding technique. "We just did what made sense. You were lost. Benny could find you, so we went and found you. I don't think that makes us famous. Just people who helped when help was needed. That's what you're supposed to do when someone's in trouble, right?" The simplicity of her moral framework contrasted sharply with the complex calculations that dominated Pierce's world, where helping others typically involved assessing benefit ratios and strategic advantages. Willa operated from uncomplicated conviction that assistance was obligation rather than transaction, a perspective Pierce envied, even as he recognized its impracticality in his professional context. But perhaps Leo needed exposure to exactly that kind of straightforward goodness, counterbalance to the moral complexity that would inevitably shape his future. The children talked easily, their conversation flowing between yesterday's drama and simpler topics like favorite games and school experiences. Pierce and Cynthia maintained respectful distance that allowed privacy, while fulfilling their protective oversight responsibilities. The scene carried strange normalcy, despite its origins in near tragedy, two children forming friendship, while their parents navigated much more complicated adult relationship, defined by vast power, differential, and mutual wariness. "Your estate is beautiful, Mr. Valley," Cynthia's observation broke the comfortable silence that had settled between the adults. Very different from our apartment's view of the parking lot and convenience store. Willa's been talking about the gardens and the lake, describing everything like it's a fairy tale setting. I appreciate you making her feel welcome despite how our worlds don't typically intersect except through service positions I'd normally occupy. Pierce heard the defensive pride in her acknowledgement of class difference, the preemptive assertion of dignity, before anyone could suggest her lesser position. I've learned recently that the most important capabilities have nothing to do with money or power. Your daughter possesses courage and competence that my expensive resources couldn't replicate. Those qualities don't correlate with social class or financial status. They're character traits that emerge from good parenting and personal integrity, neither of which my wealth can purchase or create artificially. Cynthia's expression softened slightly at the unexpected recognition, though wariness remained as foundation beneath tentative acceptance. Willa's been through difficult experiences before I adopted her. I work hard to give her stability and teach her that helping others matters more than accumulating things. Your compliment about my parenting means more than you might realize, coming from someone whose resources could provide material advantages I'll never manage. But I'm glad you recognize that some things matter more than money. The conversation settled into easier rhythm as they watched their children interact with Benny serving as enthusiastic intermediary. Pierce found himself studying Cynthia with interest that had nothing to do with Leo's friendship with Willa, recognizing qualities of strength and resilience that commanded respect, independent of social position. She carried herself with dignity, despite obvious awareness of power imbalance, refusing to be diminished by circumstances while maintaining protective boundaries around her daughter. I'd like to propose regular visits between Leo and Willa, if you're comfortable with that arrangement. Pierce kept his tone carefully neutral, presenting request rather than demand despite his ability to pressure cooperation. Leo needs friends outside his usual social circle, children who relate to him as person, rather than valley air. Willa demonstrated character that makes her exactly the kind of influence I want in my son's life. Obviously, this only works if you trust the safety protocols and believe Willa benefits from the friendship as much as Leo does. Cynthia considered the proposition with visible internal debate, weighing Willa's happiness and growth opportunities against protective instinct warning her away from dangerous man's complicated world. I'll agree to trial period of supervised visits, with clear understanding that I can terminate the arrangement anytime I feel Willa's well-being is compromised. She deserves friendship and new experiences, but not at cost of her safety or innocence. Your world has dangers mine doesn't, Mr. Valley. I need your commitment that those dangers won't touch my daughter even tangentially. You have my word, and my word carries weight that goes beyond simple promise. Pierce met her eyes directly, allowing her to see the absolute sincerity behind his commitment. Nothing matters more to me than Leo's safety, and I now consider Willa's safety equally important given what she did for my son. Any threat to her would be treated with same severity as threat to Leo, with full resources of my organization deployed for her protection. That's not empty guarantee, Ms. Morrison. That's binding commitment backed by everything I have. The sun descended toward the lake's horizon as the afternoon visit concluded, Willa and Leo exchanging shy promises to see each other again soon. Benny received extensive appreciation and treats, the Labrador's heroism celebrated through enthusiastic petting and verbal praise. He accepted with dignified tail wagging. Pierce walked Cynthia and Willa to their modest car, the contrast between their vehicle and his estate's luxury somehow less jarring than it had seemed when they'd arrived. 6 months dissolved into new patterns as Leo and Willa's friendship deepened through regular visits that expanded cautiously beyond supervised garden meetings. Cynthia's initial wariness transformed gradually into something approaching trust, as Pierce demonstrated consistent respect for boundaries and genuine commitment to both children's welfare. Their adult relationship evolved through countless brief conversations during child exchanges, discovering unexpected common ground in their shared protective instincts and determination to provide their children with authentic childhood, despite complicated circumstances. Pierce found himself anticipating Cynthia's arrivals with interest that had nothing to do with facilitating children's friendship, drawn to her strength and uncompromising integrity. She challenged his assumptions about power and worth, refusing to be impressed by wealth, while somehow not being intimidated by his dangerous reputation. Their conversations gradually extended beyond necessary coordination, lingering over coffee while children played, exploring perspectives that bridged their vastly different worlds. The Kovacs organization never attempted renewed action against Leo, their strategic recalculation apparently concluding that Pierce's demonstrated response capacity made targeting his family unacceptably costly. Chen's defection and the systematic dismantling of their local infrastructure had sent clear message that some boundaries carried lethal consequences when crossed. The lesson reverberated through criminal networks, establishing reputation that actually enhanced Leo's safety through demonstrated willingness to respond with overwhelming force to family threats. Leo's trauma from the kidnapping attempt faded gradually into experience that shaped rather than defined him, leaving residual caution, but not paralyzing fear. His friendship with Willa provided grounding influence that kept him connected to normal childhood concerns despite growing awareness of his father's complicated world. The boy's character developed depth that Pierce recognized as emerging from adversity successfully navigated, resilience built through surviving genuine danger rather than being artificially protected from all possible harm. Willa continued her tracking games with Benny, though now with Pierce's resources supporting her natural talent through professional training that enhanced rather than replaced her intuitive approach. The girl's heroism had earned her place in Leo's life, and by extension in Pierce's protected circle, her mother's relationship with Pierce evolving into partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection that neither rushed to define or formalize. The estate's gardens bloomed into spring 6 months after the kidnapping attempt, the eastern section where Leo had overheard the conspiracy, now reclaimed as space of beauty rather than trauma. Pierce stood at the window of his study, watching Leo and Willa play an elaborate tracking game with Benny, their laughter carrying across the manicured lawn. Cynthia sat reading on a nearby bench, her presence now comfortable rather than cautious, belonging to the scene in ways that would have seemed impossible when they'd first met during desperate crisis. Pierce's phone buzzed with business requiring attention, the endless complications of his professional world, demanding decisions and actions that kept his empire functioning. But for this moment, he allowed himself to simply watch, appreciating the unexpected gift that had emerged from near tragedy. Leo was safe, genuinely happy in ways that hadn't existed before Willa's intervention, and Pierce himself had discovered that power and control mattered less than connection and trust, lessons taught by a 7-year-old girl and her remarkable Labrador. Thank you all for following this story of courage, redemption, and unexpected connections. If this touched your heart, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps us bring more stories like Leo and Willa's journey to life. Every share means another person might find inspiration in how ordinary courage can change everything when it matters most. 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 When it matters most.